Hello, welcome. I'm Pauline from PQW, and I've got some exciting fun things to show you in this lesson. I'm going to show you how I've made these hats. What do you think? Like, you can make them any size, any shape, for a small toddler up to a large adult. You can make them for men or women or children, so for everybody, and you can make lots and lots and lots of these. But to start with, I'm going to explain a few of the steps that we need to go through, how to get the shape, how to make it to the size you want. There is a pattern for this. I have produced a pattern which will give you a cutting chart. It's just a basic chart. You may have to adjust things to suit the size that you're making for. You can make the brim any width you want. Like if you want to have a really wide brim, you'll just make extra strips. But they're all made out of a honey bun. Now, if you don't know what a honey bun is a package of fabric that the fabric companies do up for us. All the colours are coordinated, and the width of this strip is 1.5 inches wide. But if you can't find a honey bun in the colour selection that you want, cut your own fabrics. So cut your strips of fabric across the width, 1.5 inches wide. And from that, you can then start to produce your hats. This one here, I've cut the fabrics myself, 1.5 inches wide. The other two hats, well, this one in particular, I used the one fabric, just cut lots of strips 1.5 inches wide. This one here, the colourful one, it's actually got two different colourways in it, but they all blend together nicely. Now, I wished I had have made this brim a bit wider on this hat, but I ran out of fabric, so that was as far as I could go because I just couldn't find anything else to add to this. But the good thing is, if I do find some more of that fabric, I can come back and add some more strips to it to make the brim wider. So there's lots and lots of options. But it is good if you've got an existing hat that you really love to wear, because that would be the perfect thing for you to model from. So, like for instance, from Rob's hat, Rob's Akubra, I still have this. I modelled from this to make this hat. Okay, now I could wear this hat, it could be for men or for women, it just depends on the colour. But what I've done first up, and in the pattern you're going to get all different sorts of measurements. I've put a little guide in there for what size you would make a toddler, for a toddler or a young child, up through teenagers to a small adult's hat, to a medium adult's hat, to a large adult's hat. So let's say we're going to model it from this. So the first thing I've done is I've measured across, the crown. So like to start here, we're going to start with a circle, okay? So in the chart, I will tell you what size this possibly should be if you're making it for a child. So what I found here when I've made this hat, I've modelled this top to be the same as this measurement here. So that's why it's good to have an existing hat, because I don't know what size you're making for. I could just put a basic guide in the pattern for you. The next thing I needed to do is work out how deep I wanted this side of the hat to be and how deep I wanted the brim. So by getting all the measurements off this hat, so I could come down and I could measure here and work out that this was about 5 inches. And then when I constructed this, I got it to be about 5 inches. Then I measured, get this out of the road, I measured the brim. That's about 3.5 inches. So then I could make this 3.5 inches. So having that hat as my model, and then, of course, with our Akubras. And if you're watching this video and you live somewhere else in the world, this is a traditional stockman's hat in Australia, a Akubra. This is what most of the men in the country wear. They're gorgeous hats. So you can make your own. So now with this one, once I've got it finished, I can shape it the same because it's very flexible. And the great things about these hats are that they're very washable, okay? They're very pliable. If I was going travelling to the beach, I could just roll this up and throw it in my suitcase. And once it comes out, it's back to shape. So it's just a really gorgeous fabric hat. How about that? Like if I want the brim all wavy and crinkled up, when I finish, I can just crinkle it all up like this, and then I get this nice wavy look. Here I could just use it as a bowler hat, just wear it like this. Have the brim down. I could squash it in. I can roll the sides up, do whatever you want with them. Just get them to the shape that you want. So I think you'll enjoy making them. The process is easy. It takes me about 4 to 5 hours to make one of these hats. It may take you a little bit longer. It may take longer if it's a larger size. But let's get started. It took me quite some time to get the rhythm going on this, to get the shape right, to get this crown measurement right. So like when I first made the first one, which was this one, I unpicked it about 5 times and kept going. But I think now we've got the recipe right for you. But remember, if you've got an existing hat, use that as your model, as your plan. But just to go over some of the products that we're going to be using, as I said, you could purchase a honey bun pack. And there's probably enough in this pack to possibly make about 3 hats. And, you know, you could use different colour combinations, because in here I've got the reds, the greys and the navies. So, you know, you could get 3 different style hats out of this. Or just use your scraps up and just, you know, even if you use fat quarters, and that's what this hat was made out of, fat quarters. And I just cut lots of strips 1.5 inches wide and just join them all together to be one long piece, and we'll go into that in a moment. But we need the 1.5 inch wide strips. Now I've used the Hobbs Heirloom pre-cut 1.25 inch wide strips. Now this is fusible both sides, which makes the hats come together really, really quickly. And I've found a lot of the other pre-cut waddings, or even if we cut our own wadding, they're too soft and the hats don't hold the shape. So this is why I use this one. Now this is much too wide. So I'm going to show you how I've cut this up to be able to be used in the hats. So we've got the wadding, we've got the fabric. Then I use the honey bun sasha tool. This is what I've designed this for, to put the 1.5 inch strips through this as we sew with the wadding and the fabric. And I'm going to show you how to use that. This is what it looks like. Okay, our normal sasha tool does not work for this because it needs to have a wide split here to fit the bulk through. I do recommend a good strong needle because we've got lots of thickness to go through. So as I always use these needles, they're perfect. The titanium top stitch needles, and I've used the size 80-12 to do this, and it just penetrates through. If your needle's not strong enough and sharp enough, your machine may skip stitches going through the bulk. And the bulk's no problem once we get the machine set up properly. And of course, to get started, and you'll appreciate this when I start making the hat, when we're in this section here, getting the crown started, it's a very tight curve to sew around. So, which means when you're sewing, your fingers could be very close to the needle. So I don't like to do that because definitely don't want to put the needle through my finger. So I glue the first couple of rounds so that my fingers don't have to sit close under that foot near the needle. So that's why we use the glue. And then to sew this together, when I make the cord, I call this the honey bun cord. When we make this cord, we're going to have a very close row of stitching, straight stitching around here. When I do that straight stitching at the machine, I like to use the open toe foot because I want to be able to see where I'm stitching. I want to keep the row of stitching consistently even. So I'm going to show you how to set this up on the machine and move your needle over so you can use the edge of the foot against the side of the strip that you're constructing. Then when we come to putting the hat together, to making the shape, we're going to use a zigzag on the machine. And in the pattern, I tell you what size zigzag, what width and what length to use to get it perfect. But as we're stitching this zigzag, and I know that you can't see that because I used a blending fabric, a thread, sorry. Here I've used a contrast thread. You can see the zigzag where the cord is zigzagged together. To keep these cords connected together so there's no gap here, I found the best foot to use for that is the edge stitching foot, or the stitch in the ditch foot. This is for my Bernina machine. It's got this little arm that comes out that sits through the middle of the foot, comes down here. Now this little guide here sits between the rows. So then I know my zigzags absolutely perfectly even on both sides. So we'll set that up on the machine later when I start to show you how to construct the shape of your hat. It's very, very simple. There's nothing hard about it. It's very exciting and lots of fun to do. So let's say we've got our fabrics all cut. Now to cut our wadding, just unroll this. Now you can be very particular about this. You can, and you can see how this is all stuck together. Just unroll quite a bit of it. Just let that drop over the side. Now you can use a ruler, but I found a ruler too slow. But if you were going to use a ruler, so this is measuring 1.5 inches, so you're going to come to 1 1/4, and you just use, I use an old rotary cutter here, so I'm going to use this one that's got a blunt blade in it, and we're just going to cut and just keep moving it along. Now you'll need as much wadding cut as the amount of fabric strips that you have. So it can be in sections if you don't want to cut one big long piece. You can cut shorter pieces if you've got scraps left over, and as we sew we just butt the wadding together. There's no need to join it. But I usually just use my cutter and just cut through. So if you're game enough to do that, that's the way I would do it. If you're a bit nervous about that, use your ruler to get your measurement. But if it's not perfectly straight, it doesn't matter. So if you're cutting 20 strips of fabric, you'll need as much as this to cover your 20 strips of fabric. It's just whatever size you're making. So now the next thing we're going to do is we need to join all the fabric strips together to make one big long piece. So what we'll do, I'm using, this is a sample. These are the pre-cut 1.5 inch strips. So we're going to, one full width of fabric. So we're going to put these down, put one piece down, the next piece on top of it. And we're going to sew, I don't want to include the selvage, so I've just let it overlap. Instead of cutting the selvage off at this stage, I've just left the selvage overlap. But I'm going to sew diagonally across here to join these strips together. Once I've sewn across here, and use a small stitch length, like I'd go down to about 1.7 because I don't want this to open up. Once we've stitched across there, we're just going to cut it back to have a 1/4 inch seam and trim it back, and this is what it looks like, because there's my join. So we'll then press that, and just finger pressing it's fine, and there's our strips joined together. So now when we make the hat, we have to determine where the brim starts. So I always make enough to make the top, and the crown and the side. This is one section from the start here down to where the brim starts. That's one piece where we join all the strips together and put the wadding through it and make the fabric cord up, which we'll show you. Then when we do the brim, this is another set of strips. We can't have all of this joined together as one piece because we've got to construct it in two separate pieces. So make all of this up, roll it up like so. Then we put our wadding strip to it. Now when we put our wadding to it, we don't want the wadding or the batting, we don't want that to go right up to the top. We want it about, 1 inch from the top. Now we can iron this I just need to close this board up. Now you can iron this wadding all the way along the strip, and you can see how now the wadding or the batting doesn't go right to the edges. It's got a little, about 1/8 of an inch either side. Put this down, and all I'm going to do is press the first few inches. Just with a hot dry iron, just press so that the wadding sits there. Then I'm going to fold this over and press, whoops, it's all tangled up. Press that first few inches and then grab your scissors, and we're going to just trim this back for the first 3 inches or so. So what I'm doing is just grading it back on an angle, like so. Just take that much off. So now when we open this out, the wadding's even stuck together because it was still hot. Just pull this apart. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like. It looks a little bit messy, but that's okay. I'm going to take the selvage off, trim this back a little bit further, because where we start sewing in here, we want to get rid of a lot of the bulk. So that's what I'm doing for this first little bit. I want to trim that back so that it sits nice and flat. Now I then use the glue and put little dots of glue on here. Fold this over and press. Now the fusible on the wadding doesn't stick to your iron, which is really good. Now what I want to do here, now you have to do this at the start here and at the finish where you come in to start making the brim up. You need to get rid of the bulk at the start and the finish. Now you'll be able to, with the pattern, it'll be telling you approximately how many strips to join to make this section and how many strips to join together to make this. So you'll know where the start and finish is. So now we're just going to put some glue down each side, like so. And then we need to fold this over on both sides. I'll just get this folded in and then I'll show you how it looks. So this is how it's looking, and I'm going to press it now just to set the glue. Now this is all the pressing you have to do. So I'd go to the other end of my strip and do exactly the same. Get it all prepared like this. So you'll be doing 2 starts and 2 finishes like this to make up your both sets. Now we're ready to go to the sewing machine and we're going to start sewing. Now when we start sewing, we're going to have a stitch length about 3. We're going to have the open toe foot on the machine, and you can use whatever colour thread you want. As I said with this one, when I was making the cord up with this one, I don't know that you could be able to see it, but when I was making the cord up for this one, I used a variegated thread to do all of this straight stitching. But when I started zigzagging it, the variegated thread was too much. I started with the variegated thread and I did a couple of rounds and I just didn't like it. So I undid it and then I put a plain white thread on. And I used the same thread in the top and the bobbin because the hats are reversible. Okay? So you want the same thread in the top and the bottom. Put your open toe foot on, set your machine up as I've told you. We use the honey bun sasher. We put this in and back down. Then we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're now going to fold this over in half. And we're going to start sewing right on this tip. So right here we're going to start sewing. So it would be advisable to have a little leader piece of fabric to start. So I'm going to cut a square of fabric with some wadding in it, fold it over, and I'll start sewing on that little square of fabric first and then come straight onto this. I find if we try to start sewing right here, what happens is the feed dogs suck this down and you won't be able to get good traction to get it start sewing. So once we get onto here, we'll stop with the needle down to hold this in position, and then we use this tool to pull it to do all the folding, and then we just fold it over and stitch in about 1/8 of an inch from the edge all the way through. So we're going to go to the machine now and set it up, and we'll start stitching this. So come and join me at the sewing machine.
And this is part 2 of lesson 1. All right, and when you're ready.
Okay, so now we're at the sewing machine. Just a little couple of things here. We've got the open toe foot on that we talked about. I'm just using a normal white thread in my bobbin and my top because this is nice soft colours that I'm using. I suggest that you roll your wadding and your fabric up into a roll and maybe put them in 2 separate baskets on the floor alongside you, just to keep them from tangling up. Now we've got our starter piece I've just made. It's just a little piece of fabric with some wadding inside. But on my machine, and I strongly, strongly, strongly recommend this to make the hat easy to glide under the needle, is put a sew slip mat on your machine. Now, if you don't know about a sew slip mat, it's a mat that lays over the bed of the machine. It's got a big cutout for your feed dogs to work up through. It grabs to the bed of the machine. So once you put it on, just pat it down so it's adhered to the machine so it doesn't move. Now, as we sew, everything's just going to glide through. It's not so important when you're making the fabric cord up, but when you start constructing the hat and the way you have to hold it, the mat takes all the pressure off you. So everything will just glide perfectly for you. So I really recommend that. So now we're going to start sewing with our feeder piece on here. I've got my machine with stitch length set to 3. And I've moved my needle right over to the right-hand side so that I can use the inside edge of the foot as my guide against the edge of the fabric. So I've got a guide to stitch with, so it'll keep me quite straight. It's impossible to be perfectly straight, but get as straight as you can. So what we're going to do is start sewing onto our leader piece. Just put the pressure foot down. So the leader piece is in place. Put our foot down and line this up. And we'll have the awl in close by, so when we get onto here, we can start stitching. So now I'll just hold the leader piece and pull it so that it then gets me started. Okay. So now what we do is hold your batting so that it's laying in the middle of your strip. I'll just pull this back a bit. Now I'm going to fold this in, okay? Hold it firm, pull down with the tool, and you can see how it folds it nicely for me. And once again, because this little piece is so thin, this is where we tapered it down. So we'll just sew along to the edge. Stop with your needle down. It's very important to have your needle in the down position. Fold, pull, roll over and stitch. Now you can see my strip is now getting wider because we're getting off that little bit that we graded back. You know, and if you cut your own strips, you won't have that little pinked edge on your strips like I have here. That can make it just a little bit more difficult to get it even. And what you're trying to do is keep your strip nice and even. But I just find that, and you can see now that my side of my foot is sitting right against the edge of this fabric where I fold it, and my needle is in about 1/8 of an inch. So now all I do as I sew is keep my eye on that foot and just sew along. Just keep sewing. Now this will take you a little time to do all of this, but it's worth doing. But what I'm going to show you next, I'll just sew a little bit further, but I want to show you how I would join the wadding or the batting in if I need to, because I'll run out of it very soon. So yes, you do have to stop often to keep folding your fabric. But if I didn't use the honey bun tool, I'd be sitting here doing all of this. I'd have to iron it and I'd have to turn it over and pin it or press it. So this is what's going to keep everything even. You can see how it's folding it even for me. So it takes all the challenge out of me having to do all that extra work. Just fold, pull, roll over and stitch. But I find the awl is very handy, and I love the one that's got the sharp tapered point to it. You'll find these on our website. Anything I'm showing you here, except for the fabrics, we don't sell the fabric, we sell the wadding, we sell the honey bun, we sell the glue, we sell the sew slip mat. It's all on our website, which is www.pqw.com.au, and you can look around and see what else you might like to have. And the pattern is available on our website, and I really suggest you need the pattern to give you all the guidance of the cutting and all the little incidentals that you'll need. The pattern has photos in it, close-up photos of different things that you'll need to see. So now I'm running out of my wadding. I'll just pull this down a little bit further, stitch a little bit more. Now what I do is get the next piece of wadding. Just be sure that this is nice and straight, that both ends are straight. So we'll just trim this back a bit to get it straight. And all we do is butt it up and keep going. So we don't have to join it, which is nice. It saves a bit of time. Just come straight over. When you get to a join where all your fabric strips are joined, you just keep pulling the tool down. Everything will fold over for you nicely. That's why I said in the beginning, always make sure when you join your strips together on the 45-degree angle, use a small stitch, because you don't want the seam to pop as you pull down with the sashing tool. You want it to just fold over nicely. So now this will take you a little time of stitching like this. So what I call this is making the fabric cord to construct our hats. So you're going to do it in 2 sets. You'll do the set for the crown and the side and the set for the brim. So we'll keep stitching, and then I'm going to show you how to start gluing the top and constructing the top and the sides, and how to put the brim on. Very simple steps from here on in. You'll enjoy it. Okay, so let's go and continue sewing. Then we'll come back and we'll show you how to start the zigzagging and constructing the hat.